The first time your own child looks at you like you don't belong, something inside you goes quiet. The valet stared at my truck like it had taken a wrong turn. A dented, mud-dusted F-150 didn't match the line of glossy black SUVs and luxury sedans parked beneath the glass awning of the Whitfield Grand Hotel. The kind of place where the air smelled like polished marble and expensive perfume before you even stepped inside. He took my keys anyway, professional smile stretched tight. "Enjoy your evening, sir." I adjusted my tie in the reflection of the hotel door. The suit I wore wasn't new navy wool, a little shiny at the elbows, pressed as best as I could manage. The last time I wore it was 7 years ago, at my wife's funeral. Tonight was Summit Dynamics' anniversary gala. My company, not that anyone in there knew it. I hadn't attended one of these events in years. Not because I couldn't, because I chose not to. I'd spent my life building Summit from a rented garage and one stubborn machine. I understood steel and deadlines. I never understood rooms full of champagne and polite laughs. But my son was here. Caleb. He'd worked hard. He'd climbed. And no matter how distant he'd grown, he was still my boy. So I walked in. The ballroom hit like a wave, bright chandeliers, clinking glasses, string music, and the soft roar of 200 conversations that all sounded like confidence. Men in tailored suits, women in gowns that looked like they were poured onto them, smiles that came with business cards. I kept to the edges, the way you do when you're not sure you're welcome in the center. Then I spotted Caleb near the bar, sharp suit, easy grin, surrounded by executives like he belonged there. And beside him, a tall, blonde woman with posture like royalty, Brittany Carlisle, his fiancée. Some people don't need your name to decide your worth. Your hands are enough. I moved toward Caleb slowly, rehearsing a simple line in my head. "Proud of you, son." That was all I wanted to say. But the crowd pressed in, and I ended up near the buffet in a service station, trying to look like I knew what I was doing. My hands gave me away. They always did. Thick knuckles, rough palms, a lifetime of building and fixing. "Excuse me." The voice was cold and clipped, like a command dressed up as politeness. I turned and found Brittany looking me up and down as if she were scanning a barcode. "The staff entrance is around the corner," she said. "Guests aren't supposed to see." Help. Lingering. For a second, my brain didn't catch up. Then it did. She thought I worked there. I kept my face steady. "I'm a guest." Her smile flickered thin, practiced, not sincere. Oh, my mistake. It wasn't a mistake. It was a judgment. She glanced past me like I was already dismissed. "Just make sure you're not blocking anything. People notice." I could have told her who I was. I could have ended it right there with one sentence. But I didn't. I wasn't there to win a power contest with my son's fiancée. I was there for Caleb. And right then, Caleb's voice cut in behind her. "Dad?" I turned. Caleb stood there, and surprise flashed across his face. Then something tighter took over. Embarrassment. His eyes darted around the room, checking who might be watching. "What are you doing here?" he asked. Not angry, not warm, just startled, like I'd shown up at the wrong address. I swallowed. "Thought I'd stop by. Big night." Brittany's expression shifted, recalculating. Caleb forced a smile. "Brittany, this is my father. Martin. Not Dad. Just Martin. Like I was a problem he was managing. The sharpest humiliation isn't public, it's personal." Caleb introduced Brittany like she was the centerpiece of his new life. Then he introduced me like an awkward footnote. Brittany's smile turned sweet in a way that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, Caleb's mentioned you." He hadn't. I could tell by how he wouldn't meet my eyes. An executive stepped over and started talking schedules and investor expectations. Caleb brightened instantly, slipping into that polished voice he'd learned in conference rooms. Brittany joined in, offering opinions like she already sat at the top. I stood there, invisible. Caleb touched my elbow, guiding me a few steps away like you'd guide someone who didn't know where to stand. "Listen," he murmured. "It's crowded tonight. A lot of important people. Maybe you'd be more comfortable heading home." The words hit harder than I expected. I'd worked double shifts for this kid. I'd packed his lunches, stayed up with him through fevers, sat alone at his school events after his mother died and pretended it didn't break me. And now he was asking me to leave so I wouldn't embarrass him. I nodded. "Yeah, sure." I turned toward the exit. Then Brittany's voice carried behind me, too loud to be an accident. "Is that really his father?" she said. He looks like he just came off a construction site. Soft laughter followed. Not cruel enough to be called cruel. Just enough to sting. I stopped for a half second, waiting for Caleb to say something, to correct her, to defend me, to at least clear his throat. Silence. I kept walking. Outside, the cool air didn't help. My truck rolled up. The valet handed me my keys without meeting my eyes. I drove home with the radio off, hands clenched around the wheel. Because Brittany's insult? I'd heard worse in my life. But my son's silence? That was new. That was the kind of pain that doesn't fade on the ride home. A quiet house can feel like an accusation when you come home carrying shame that isn't even yours. My porch light had burned out weeks ago. I'd meant to replace it. I hadn't. The dark doorway felt like an honest reflection of how I'd been living, always fixing the big things, ignoring the small ones. Inside, the kitchen was lit by street lamp glow. I dropped my keys in the bowl and stared at the fridge. Photo magnets. Old memories. One picture always stopped me. Caleb at 10. Gap-toothed grin. Both of us covered in grease in my first workshop. He had his hand on my shoulder like he was proud to be seen with me. Back then he used to say, "When I grow up, I'm going to build machines like you." I touched the photo and whispered to no one. "When did you start hiding me?" I made coffee even though it was after midnight. The ritual didn't calm my mind, but it gave my hands something to do. Memories kept coming anyway. I was 26 when I worked nights at Great Lakes Steel, saving every extra dollar. My wife, Laura, used to count the cash with me at this same table, laughing softly. "You're going to build something," she'd say. "I know it." We married young. Caleb came the next year. I bought a used CNC machine before we could really afford it, rented a small warehouse with cracked floors, and started Summit Dynamics. I was operator, salesman, janitor. Laura worked days and did the books at night. Then the diagnosis. Stage 4. 3 months from hospital room to funeral. Laura was 35 when she died. Caleb was 8. He wore a little suit at the cemetery and refused to cry until later, in the car, when he thought I couldn't hear him. After that, he begged to come to the shop with me so he wouldn't be alone. So he did. He grew up to the sound of machines and the smell of metal. And I grew up into a father who tried to make up for a missing mother by building a future big enough to cover the hole. When your gut says something's wrong, it's usually because your past has trained it to recognize patterns. Brittany's words at the gala replayed in my head, but so did something else, her questions. Not the rude ones, the careful ones. I remembered overhearing her with one of our VPs, asking about our facilities, our contracts, the Phoenix automation patent, the client pipeline. The questions were too precise, too technical, for casual curiosity. It felt like she was mapping us. I tried to tell myself I was being paranoid, but paranoia doesn't usually come with evidence. At 2:17 a.m., I called Frank Delaney, former Chicago PD, now head of Summit's corporate security. He answered on the second ring, voice rough. "This better be important." "It is," I said. A pause. "Who?" "My son's fiancée, Brittany Carlisle." Frank didn't laugh. He didn't sigh. He went quiet the way cops go quiet when something starts to click. "You think she's trouble?" "I don't know," I admitted. "But I need to know." Background takes days. "I'll wait," I said. I hung up and sat with cold coffee and the weight of 30 years. I'd built Summit by trusting my instincts, and my instincts were screaming that Brittany wasn't just a snob. She was a threat. Before we go further, if you've ever had a moment where you realized the people laughing didn't know who you really were, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment. Where are you watching from? And what time is it there? Sometimes the hardest conversations start with the smallest humiliations. The truth rarely arrives gently. It shows up like a file folder you can't close. Sunday morning, my phone buzzed. "Frank, meet me. I found something." We met at Summit headquarters. The building looked sterile on a weekend, like it only existed when money moved through it. Frank's face was tight when I stepped into his office. "How bad?" I asked. He turned his laptop toward me. "Her identity only goes back 2 years. Before that, nothing." I frowned. Nothing? No college record that matches, no credit history trail, no consistent employment. She appears out of thin air. He clicked to another screen. In 2020, she was dating a senior manager at Carson Tech. 3 months later, Carson had a data breach. She vanished right after. He clicked again. In 2018, she was engaged to a CFO in Denver. Engagement ended quietly. 2 weeks later, proprietary code leaked. Same pattern. I sat back, stomach tightening. Coincidence? I asked, though I didn't believe it. Frank shook his head. Coincidences don't repeat this clean. He leaned forward. And she's been asking questions about Summit. Not just surface questions. Founder questions. Trust questions. My jaw clenched. She wasn't just marrying my son. She was digging into ownership. And Caleb proud. Ambitious Caleb was giving her access because he wanted to believe she loved him. Frank's voice dropped. If you confront her now, she disappears. So what do I do? I asked. Frank's eyes didn't flinch. You move like an owner. I hadn't wanted that role publicly again. But if someone was inside my company and inside my son's life, I didn't have the luxury of staying invisible. Every layer you uncover makes you wish you'd never started digging until you remember why you had to. Over the next few days, Frank went deeper. I tried to act normal. I walked the shop floor. I nodded at workers. I answered emails. But inside, I was counting hours, like they were breaths. Tuesday, Frank called again. I found money. What kind? I asked. Payments routed through a consulting shell to an account linked to her, and the shell traces back to Vertex Systems. Vertex, our biggest competitor, the one company that would love to get Phoenix our automation process that made our production faster and cheaper than anyone else's. If Vertex got it, they could undercut our contracts, steal our clients, and bleed us dry. That night I saw Caleb and Brittany at a coffee shop downtown. She leaned close, smiling. He looked relaxed in a way I hadn't seen in years, like he finally felt chosen. I almost walked in, almost yanked him out. But Frank had warned me. If she caught a hint, she'd vanish. So I watched from across the street and hated the fact that my son looked happy. Because happiness can be a trap, and Caleb didn't know he was standing in one. The hardest part of being a father is realizing love isn't always enough to protect someone from themselves. I sat in my old workshop that night. Not the polished innovation lab. Caleb liked to show investors my real shop. The place that smelled like cutting oil and steel and honest labor. Tools on pegboards. Scratches in the floor from decades of heavy parts. Caleb used to sit here on an upside-down bucket and ask questions until my throat got dry. I thought about the quiet ways I'd supported him. The scholarship fund I'd structured so he qualified. The internship I'd nudged into place with one casual introduction. The first big client I'd positioned him for so he could close the deal and feel like he'd earned it. Even his promotion, I'd encouraged our CEO to see his potential. I'd done it all from the shadows because Caleb wanted to be self-made. I thought hiding my influence would protect his pride. Instead, it built a pride that could be exploited. Someone like Brittany, someone trained to read ambition and feed it, could walk right through the doors I'd opened and turn them into a weapon. I realized something that made my chest ache. I hadn't just made myself invisible to protect Caleb. I'd made myself invisible because part of me feared he'd reject me if the world saw where he came from. And that fear had created the exact conditions for this disaster. When an investigator looks at you with pity, you know the story is about to change. Thursday night, Frank showed up at my house with a thick envelope. He didn't sit down right away, just stood by my kitchen table like he didn't want to bring bad news into a place that still carried old ghosts. It's worse, he said. He laid out photos. Brittany at events, different hair, different makeup, different men. Brittany, but not Brittany. Her real name is Brooke Ellison, Frank said. She's used multiple identities. He slid a timeline toward me. 2018 Denver engaged to CFO leak gone. 2020 Atlanta dating director breach gone. 2023 Chicago meets Caleb already on Vertex payroll. Not random, I whispered. Frank nodded. Not random. I stared at the evidence until my eyes burned. What's her target now? I asked. Frank's voice was blunt. Phoenix, your contract pipeline, client pricing, everything Vertex needs. My throat tightened. Does Caleb know? I asked. Frank shook his head. If you tell him without proof, he'll defend her. People defend what they're terrified to admit they need. I closed my eyes. Caleb needed to believe someone loved the successful version of him, and she needed him to believe it long enough to unlock everything. Frank leaned forward. You want to stop this? You step forward. That meant one thing. A board meeting. An emergency one. And it meant Caleb would learn the truth I'd kept hidden for years about ownership, about the trust, about how much of his life I'd quietly supported. He would feel betrayed, but it was still better than letting Vertex destroy him and Summit. A single email can be a match once it's lit. You don't get to control what burns. Saturday morning before dawn, I opened my laptop and drafted the email. To Board of Directors, CEO, Senior Leadership. Subject: Emergency Board Meeting Mandatory. Monday, 9 a.m., 14th Floor Conference Room. Security and corporate integrity matter. No details, no soft language, just a summons. I hit send. Within minutes, my phone lit up like an alarm. Unknown numbers, board members, our CEO, then Caleb. Once, twice, 4 times. I stared at his name and felt something twist in my chest. If I answered, I'd soften. If I softened, I'd hesitate. And hesitation was how companies got robbed and sons got ruined. So I turned my phone off and set it down. Sunday passed in a fog of unanswered messages and pacing through empty rooms. I walked the factory floor alone, listening to silent machines like they were holding their breath. By Monday, Summit didn't feel like a headquarters. It felt like a courtroom, and I was walking in to testify against the woman my son thought was his future. The boardroom is the one place where truth doesn't care about your feelings, and that's exactly why it works. I arrived at 8:45. The elevator opened to the 14th floor, quiet and bright. I stood outside the conference room for a full 10 seconds before pushing in. Our CEO, Grant Lawson, looked up from his papers, jaw tight. "Martin," he said, "the board's unsettled. Your email was intense." "They're about to be more unsettled," I replied. Board members filtered in finance, legal, operations faces annoyed, curious, impatient. Then the door opened again. Caleb walked in, tie slightly crooked, phone in hand, mid-sentence, until he saw me. He froze. Color drained from his face. "Dad?" he said, loud enough that a few heads turned. "What are you doing here?" I kept my voice calm. "Sit down." Caleb didn't. "You ignored my calls." Grant cleared his throat and stood. "This emergency session has been called by Martin Hart, founder and majority shareholder of Summit Dynamics." Caleb's head snapped toward Grant. "What?" A murmur rolled through the room. Caleb turned to me like I'd become someone else. What is he saying?" I stood. 30 years ago, I began. I started Summit with one used machine and savings from a steel job. I stepped back from public operations 6 years ago, but I never left. I control 72% of Summit through a family trust. The room went silent. Caleb's chair scraped as he stumbled backward. "You own, Dad." His voice cracked between disbelief and anger. He looked around the table. "You all knew?" No one answered. Their eyes did. Caleb sat down slowly, as if gravity suddenly doubled. I swallowed. "There's more, and it's worse. It's one thing to expose a liar, it's another to expose your own child's blind spot." The door opened. Frank Delaney stepped in, carrying a folder and a laptop. Caleb stared at him, confused. I nodded at Frank. The screen lit up with a photo. Brittany, only not. Different hair, different name. "This," I said, "is the woman my son plans to marry. Except that's not her real identity." Caleb's face tightened. "This is insane." Frank spoke calmly. "Her legal name is Brooke Ellison. She has multiple confirmed infiltrations. Same pattern, same outcome." A timeline filled the screen. Cities, dates, men, breaches, disappearances. Then financial records, shell payments tied to Vertex systems. Grant's expression hardened. Board members leaned in. Caleb shook his head slowly. "You're doing this because she insulted you at a party." I met his eyes. "I'm doing this because she's inside our walls." Caleb's voice rose. "She loves me." Frank slid the folder toward him. "Read." Caleb's hands trembled as he opened it. Photo after photo. Bank transfers. Aliases. Employment gaps that weren't gaps, they were cover. Caleb's breathing turned shallow. He reached for his phone. "I'm calling her." "Don't," I said sharply. He ignored me. His thumb hovered over her name. And then the conference room doors burst open. Security walked in. And between them, Brittany Carlisle, heels clicking, chin lifted, eyes already calculating. The most dangerous people don't panic when caught, they adjust their mask. Brittany's gaze swept the room and landed on Caleb. Instantly her face softened. "Caleb," she breathed. "Thank God. They grabbed me from your office. This is a misunderstanding. Frank didn't blink. Not a misunderstanding. We caught you accessing confidential files. Brittany turned to me, a flicker of surprise crossing her eyes. She hadn't expected me at the head of the table. Frank connected his laptop. Transfer logs appeared, download activity, copied folders, timestamps, Phoenix documentation, client contract summaries, pricing models. Everything Vertex would need to gut us. Brittany smiled tightly. My laptop died. I was emailing myself a file for a presentation. Frank's tone stayed calm. Your laptop is in your car. Battery at 96%. The room tightened. Caleb stepped toward her, shaken. Brittany, tell them it's a mistake. She reached for his arm. Honey, please. Caleb looked from her hand to the screen to the folder in his own grip. His voice cracked. Brooke? Brittany's smile vanished. Her posture straightened. Fine, she snapped. Let's stop pretending. Caleb flinched like he'd been slapped. Yes, she said coldly. I work for Vertex. Yes, I gathered information. And yes, you gave me access. Tears welled in Caleb's eyes. You said you loved me. Brittany's expression softened for half a second, then hardened again. I said a lot of things, she replied. A sound escaped Caleb that wasn't quite a sob, wasn't quite breath. I felt something inside me go cold. Grant stood. Frank, call the FBI. Frank nodded. Already contacted. They're on the way. Brittany's confidence flickered. And then she looked at me and smiled like she'd found a second target. When a predator loses the game, they try to change the rules. So, Brittany said, eyes sharp, you're the one controlling everything. She nodded at the board like she was impressed, hiding while your son played executive. Clever. Caleb's shoulders shook. He stared at the table, as if the wood could tell him what was real. You ruined him, Brittany said, voice turning toward me. You let him believe he earned it. I stepped closer. I hid myself to protect him. She laughed, short and cruel. Protect him? Look at him. We both looked. Caleb was breaking in front of us, tears falling without permission. This isn't protection, Brittany said. This is humiliation. It's humiliation because of what you did, I said, voice low. Not because the truth exists. Caleb lifted his head, eyes red. Was any of it real? He asked her, like a child asking if a nightmare is over. Brittany regarded him like he'd asked the weather. No, she said. It was a job. Caleb's face crumpled. Frank signaled security. They moved in. Brittany didn't resist. But as they guided her out, she leaned close to Caleb and whispered something. Caleb recoiled like she'd burned him. Then she turned back and met my eyes. You should have stayed invisible, she said softly. Now you get to watch him realize everything he believed was a lie. The door closed behind her. The board filed out. Voices hushed. Faces tense. Grant squeezed my shoulder as he left. We'll contain it. Frank lingered, waiting. I shook my head. Leave. And then it was just me and my son in a room too bright, too quiet, with the city staring in through glass. Sometimes the person you save hates you first because hate is easier than grief. Caleb finally spoke. I wish you'd never come to that gala. The words hit like a wrench in my chest. He stood, pacing, voice cracking. 6 years I thought Grant ran this place. 6 years I worked to prove myself. And the whole time, it was you. I stepped back because you wanted space, I said. I didn't want you to lie, he snapped. You wanted to build your own story, I said quietly. You didn't want people knowing your dad was a steel plant guy with a machine shop. Caleb stopped. His shoulders sagged. Then he whispered, I was ashamed. Hearing it out loud broke something in me, even though I'd known it for years. Caleb stared at me, eyes wet. The scholarship, he said slowly. The Hart Engineering Foundation scholarship, that was you. My silence answered. The internship at Callahan Robotics, he continued. You arranged that. I didn't deny it. Caleb's voice flattened. So what did I build? What's mine? You did the work, I said. You earned your role. But you opened every door, he whispered. And you never told me. You let me be proud of a lie. He sank back into the chair, head in his hands. I'm nothing, he said. You're not nothing, I said, stepping closer. He looked up, pain raw. Then who am I? I didn't have a neat speech. I had only truth. Love can be clumsy, and hiding doesn't protect, it distorts. Caleb stood, grabbed his jacket. I need time, he said. He reached the door, paused. Is the company safe? Frank and the FBI are handling it, I said. We're secure. Caleb nodded once and walked out. If this story is hitting you in the chest, if you've ever had family shame turn into a wall comment where you're watching from and what time it is there, I read those, and I promise you're not alone. Repair doesn't start with forgiveness. It starts with showing up when you don't feel welcome. Weeks passed. The FBI moved quietly. Vertex denied involvement publicly, but evidence doesn't care about press statements. Our systems were locked down. Lawyers did what lawyers do. But none of that mattered as much as the silence from Caleb. I didn't chase him. I wanted to, but chasing was what I'd done for years. Chasing his success. Chasing his comfort. Chasing a version of life where he wouldn't hurt. And it hadn't worked. So I did what I knew. I went back to the floor. I walked the manufacturing bays, checked on machines, asked workers about their kids, their overtime, their injuries. The shop didn't pretend. Steel doesn't lie. Kathleen Ruiz, one of our senior machinists, found me near Base 6. He's been coming down, she said. I looked up fast. Caleb? She nodded. Twice this week. Not for show. He's talking to people. Tommy's teaching him the lathe. My throat tightened. He say anything about me? Kathleen hesitated. He asked about the early days. About how you built Summit. First time I've ever heard him ask. 2 weeks later, an email arrived. Subject, coffee? From Caleb. He wrote, Dad, I'm in therapy. It's helping. I'm not ready for a big talk. But coffee? Thursday, 3 p.m. Riverside Diner. My hands shook as I typed back. I'll be there. Dad. Thursday felt like waiting for a verdict. Healing sometimes begins with a diner booth and 2 people brave enough to stay seated. The Riverside Diner smelled like fried onions and old coffee comfort disguised as grease. I arrived early and sat by the window. Caleb walked in at 3:06. He looked quieter, stripped down, like someone who'd stopped performing. He slid into the booth across from me. Hey, he said. Hey, I replied. Silence sat between us, heavy but not hostile. Finally, he said, I've been helping the FBI. That took courage, I said. He shook his head. It took me stopping the running. He stared at his coffee. My therapist says I use shame like armor. If I rejected where I came from first, it couldn't reject me. He looked up, eyes steady. I'm sorry, he said. For that night, for the years before, for being ashamed of you. My throat tightened. You don't have to. I do, he interrupted softly. Because you protected me, and I treated it like something dirty. The waitress set down coconut cream pie, and Caleb's mouth twitched into a small smile. You remembered? Of course, I said. He picked at the crust. I've been working on the floor, he said. Tommy's teaching me. I smiled. Real. Good. Caleb's eyes glistened. I thought that world made me small, he admitted. Turns out that's where real strength is. Outside, wind tapped the glass. When we stood to leave, Caleb hesitated, then hugged me quick, stiff, but real. Thanks, he said. That's the job, I replied. He stepped back. Same time next week? Hope rose like sunrise. I'd like that. The sweetest revenge isn't watching the villain fall, it's watching your family stand back up. Thursday coffees became a rhythm. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just steady. Some weeks we talked about work. Some weeks we talked about Laura. Some weeks we sat in silence that didn't feel like punishment anymore. Caleb started telling the truth at Summit. Not as a confession, but as a foundation. He stopped pretending he was self-made. He started saying, my dad showed me what work looks like. He mentored younger engineers differently too, less arrogance, more honesty. One afternoon, Grant told me quietly, he's changing. I nodded. He's becoming. Employee Appreciation Day arrived in spring. Folding tables, grill smoke, families, laughter, blue-collar and white-collar mixing without pretending they were different species. Caleb stood at the grill in jeans, flipping burgers with Tommy. Tommy told the duct tape story how I kept a press running through winter and saved jobs when corporate wanted to shut a line down. Caleb blinked. I never knew that. Tommy laughed. Your old man's a legend. Later, Caleb walked over and handed me a bottle of water. Hydrate, he said, grinning. Therapy advice. I chuckled. Good advice. He leaned on the railing. I used to think stories like that made me look small, he said. Now I think they're the best stories we have. A young engineer approached, nervous. Caleb waved him over. Carlos, Caleb said, voice clear. Meet my father, Martin Hart. He started Summit 30 years ago. No hesitation. No embarrassment. Carlos's eyes widened. That's incredible. Caleb smiled. Nobody does it alone, he said, and I realized the thing I'd wanted for years wasn't applause. It was this, my son standing beside me. When your child fixes something small you ignored for years, it can feel like forgiveness without words. A week later, Caleb showed up at my house with a toolbox. I raised an eyebrow. What's that for? He pointed at my dead porch light. You never replaced it. I laughed. Been meaning to. He climbed a ladder, screwed in a new bulb, and flicked the switch. Warm light spilled onto the porch. Caleb stepped down and smiled. Better. I stared at the light longer than I should have. It wasn't just a bulb. It was proof my son wasn't running away anymore. We sat on the porch with iced tea, listening to crickets. Caleb stared at his glass. You ever regret stepping into the light? He asked. I thought about the Gala Brittany's voice, the laughter, Caleb's silence. Then I looked at Caleb, real Caleb, not the performance. No, I said, because I got you back. His throat bobbed. Good, he whispered. We didn't erase the past, but we stopped letting it control us. And I learned something I wish I'd understood earlier. Protection isn't invisibility. Protection is truth, even when it hurts. Hook. If you're ashamed of your roots, you're not protecting yourself. You're handing someone else the power to use you. I'm telling you this because I thought hiding was love. I thought if I stayed invisible, my son could shine without carrying my rough edges. But hiding didn't protect him. It taught him shame. And shame made him vulnerable to someone who knew how to weaponize pride. Brittany Brooke, whatever name she used, she didn't just try to steal from Summit. She tried to steal my son's identity. She almost succeeded. What saved him wasn't my money or my power. It was truth. Painful truth. Public truth. The kind that makes you look at your life and ask, who am I? Without the lie. Caleb is still doing the work. Therapy. Humility. Learning the floor. Learning himself. And I'm doing mine too, learning not to disappear. Learning to let love be seen. If you're listening right now and you've been hiding where you came from or hiding yourself to protect someone, hear me. Your roots aren't a weakness. They're your foundation. The calloused hands, the long shifts, the duct tape solutions. Those are not reasons to be ashamed. They're proof you came from something real. And real beats shiny every time. Before you go, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Because somewhere out there, another father is swallowing pain in silence, and another son is pretending he doesn't need the place he came from. My name is Martin Hart, father, founder, and a man who learned too late that love shouldn't live in the shadows. Now neither of us is invisible, and for the first time in a long time, that feels like freedom.